Recorded. My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the 9th episode of the Little Book Company podcast. My guest today is Omar Shahid Hamid, who is a novelist first, and is also, or maybe he's a serving police officer first of the Police Service of Pakistan. Welcome, Omar.
Hi, Maniza. Great to be here. And sometimes I myself get confused whether I'm now primarily a novelist or primarily a police officer. So, yeah, it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. What do they say to you in your performance review?
Yeah, it's increasingly when I meet people, now I find that the more books I write, more people sort of come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, you're Umar Shahid Hamid, the writer." Whereas a few years ago it was, "Oh yeah, you're Umar Shahid Hamid, the cop." So yeah, I think it's swinging towards the writing as we speak.
Well, the excellent novelist cop who's written the novel The Prisoner, The Spinner's Tale, The Party Worker, The Fix, and The Betrayal. And The Party Worker and The Fix are ebooks on the Little Book Company. I'm very, very honored about that and happy for that. But I have to say, Omar, The Prisoner has got to be one of my favorite novels. You've done a marvelous job of this.
Thank you. I saw it in my on my shelf the other day, and it actually occurred to me that I haven't gone back to read it in some years,
Mhm.
and maybe I should. Because it's tremendous. I never expected it, especially as a first book, to kind of get the sort of acclaim and just the outreach that it ended up getting, and random people sort of coming up and saying, we don't read books, but we read that, and now we read books and things like that, and that's tremendously gratifying. So yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna pick it up off my shelf and start rereading it, or perhaps I can kind of really, if I really want to push myself, I should perhaps take a stab at reading the Urdu version of it, which has just come out.
Yes, and we'll talk about the Urdu version as well. And but I want to say that on picking up the novel again, I'm finding it even more enjoyable. And I had this conversation with you, I think 2 years ago, that trying to urge you to please revive, bring back Constantine de Souza and Akbar Khan, the main characters in this novel. They are, I must
Yeah.
be very attractive. At least they're attractive to me, and I'd like to see much more of them.
Yeah, I think they're just fantastic characters, and it's something that I have debated almost, I would say, virtually every single book that I've written after The Prisoner. When I was starting the writing process for those books, I've debated bringing them back because it's just, as characters, they're just too good to be left to or restricted to one book. And in fact, in Betrayal, I brought back, sorry, not Akbar, but Constantine.
Mhm.
It's a slightly different avatar. He's older. He's kind of, been through some rough times in his personal life, and so it's Constantine in a very different light and
Mhm.
at a very different stage in his life. So in Betrayal, he's sort of almost at the point of retirement. So
Mhm.
he's played his innings. He's kind of like, gone through his professional life, very worldly wise, and all those sorts of things.
Mhm.
And I think that doing that also kind of makes the characters, brings them even more to life. Just showing the changes in them, showing what the effect of time on those characters.
Mhm. And in another conversation, we were talking about this a bit earlier, that you can go all the way back into their lives, and you can even flesh them out more. So it doesn't have forward progression. You can take them back.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge market for prequels.
Mhm.
So yeah. That's the other way. And in fact, the book I'm sort of contemplating or doing research for right now,
Mhm.
I've been having this internal dialogue with myself because one of the ideas I had was to bring Akbar Khan back in that book. And it's still an ongoing conversation whether it would work bringing him back, or whether one should kind of like, whether I should go in a, get a new character. But I just thought that in the context of that book, it may be very interesting again doing to Akbar what I did to Constantine in Betrayal.
Mhm.
So let's see. Let's see.
Yes, do think of this. And when I look at, the sum total of your novels and what comes from them, I see this, the cities, at least Karachi's story, uh, told through the inner workings and the lens of crime and policing. And I was going to ask you, this is something that I've been thinking for a while. Do you think that the foundation of any city is crime?
Um, I don't know if I'd say that the foundation of a city is crime, but I think crime is certainly part of the cement which is in that foundation. And I think you can learn a lot about cities, no matter where you are, whether it's Mumbai or Tokyo or Karachi or London or whatever, wherever. You can learn a lot about cities by looking at their crime, because the crime patterns of those cities are essentially a map of where those cities are, where they are geographically, how land came to be acquired, how capital came to be acquired, how different ethnic groups or waves of migration impacted those cities, how different, or how crime expanded or retracted with the onset of various different ethnicities. So yeah, there's a whole mosaic that you can get from studying the crime of and especially big cities, so the large metropolitan centers of the world.
So land and capital.
Land and capital, and as I said, waves of migration.
Mhm.
Who are the people who make up that city, and where that mix comes from, and
And
who are the powers and also I should say who are the movers and shakers, and how those movers and shakers got to where they are. And oftentimes you find that if you go, back, you go back, if you dig deep enough, a lot of those movers and shakers in any city in the world come from origins that were, shall we say, semi-legal.
mhm, mhm. Or the way that laws are structured, they make many things illegal. That there are regulations and constraints put, procedures and bureaucracies that make what might have been ordinary commerce into an illegality.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, for instance, the example of America, right? So prohibition.
Mhm.
Prohibition was a law brought in the early part of the 20th century because someone thought it was a good idea to ban alcohol in the US, and that, instead of bringing about a greater, more temperance,
Mhm.
it sort of led to a revolution in crime, right? So
Mhm.
it led to sort of bringing the Sicilian mafia to the forefront of affairs. It led to so many fortunes. I mean, we talk about the Kennedys and how Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger, and so you have all these amazing stories that come from, as you said, a law or a progression of laws that may have been brought in for whatever reason and may have made what at the, was otherwise an absolutely legal activity illegal,
Mhm.
and it created these opportunities for those who hadn't had them before. and it created tremendous stories.
Mm-hmm. And also in terms of a city and its boundaries, where people can enter and where they cannot, simply on the basis of their class and their income grouping. That also probably feeds into the same idea of.
Yeah, where they can come, where those boundaries lie, and how people or individuals cross those boundaries or move across them or move up the ladder, right? So that's the other thing, right? That crime as a vehicle for social upward mobility is, I think, one of the great, it's one of the greatest vehicles for social upward mobility.
And
Um, it's that sort of quote from The Godfather that every great fortune behind every great fortune lies a great crime, right? So absolutely, I think I agree with that.
so I've got your book, The Prisoner, open in front of me because I've gone back to read it in
Right.
our talk. And I'm sitting here looking at the dedication page, and you've dedicated this first for your father, who gave his life
Right.
for what he believed in.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I wrote The Prisoner, again, I've said this numerous times, but I never really expected it to, I never expected anything to come of it, and a lot of it was sort of driven by uh, my own frustrations or whatever at the time in my career. And of course, in my life, my father, and especially the fact that he was murdered, it's always this shadow that has hung over my life, ever since I was 19, and it's always played a huge role in the decisions I've made, and it's something that I kind of always turn back to, and it's almost a thing where I was having this discussion with a friend that, like how people look at certain seminal events in history and say, there was the world before, let's say, 9/11, and the world after 9/11. So we live in, so after there was a very different world on September the 10th, 2001. There was a very different world after that, and subsequently we've never quite gotten back to the September 10th, 2001 world. And for me, I think my father's murder was that seminal event. So there was a world that I lived in, and there was a person called Omar Shahid Hamid who was there before the 5th of July 1997. And there's a person that emerged and kind of, was molded and shaped by the events of that date, which is the person that you see now.
So your father, Malik Shahid Hamid, was the managing director of the Karachi Electric Supply Corporation.
Yeah, so he was a civil servant, and at that time, Karachi's electric utility company was a government-run organization, and he had been brought in there with the specific kind of remit to tackle corruption and losses that the company or the corporation was suffering, and those losses were linked to the prevalence of political mafias within the organization. They kind of used the organization as an ATM machine, as they did with all of Karachi's other municipal utility or utility corporation.
Mhm.
And when he kind of started cracking down on this, obviously that didn't go down very well in certain quarters, and ultimately it led to the decision to murder him.
I'm so sorry, Omar.
Thank
Was that,
you. I mean, it's as I said, it's a tough a history, but it's one of those things that shape your life.
yes, and I think I was in Karachi when that happened. That was July
Oh,
5th,
okay,
1997.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mentioned
So,
that.
what were you doing in Karachi at the time?
would have
I
been,
always it's this conversation I always have with a lot of people, like, because it's curious to kind of, again, almost like putting together a story to see a mosaic from different points of view. So obviously I have sorry, a particular point of view, and a particular set of events that I witnessed on the 5th of July. But I'm always curious to find, what how other people imbibed that day, or whether they did or not, even for that matter.
well, I think that, well, I was visiting because I was living and working in Washington by that time. And
Right.
uh, I remained incredibly interested and involved with whatever was going on in Karachi. And so
Hmm.
this happened. I connected the dots as very much being, well, he must have been a good guy,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know.
I mean that's it's well, I don't know if funny is the right word for it, but because the case was at the time such a huge event in the media. It was I think, if I'm not wrong, one of the first times that such a senior civil servant had been assassinated like this. I mean, subsequently, of course, in the last 20 odd years, we've had so much more of this. But at that time, it was just a really jarring event, and it was in the papers, and everyone, as I said, everyone has their own take on it. So I remember when I first met my wife's grandmother, before I was marrying my wife, she sat me down and she said that, you know, I phoned your father the day before he was murdered, and that's very freaky, right? When someone tells you that. And I said, why? And she said, I had some issue with my electricity bill. And I just called him up. I didn't know him. I called him up, and he was nice enough to take my call. And he spoke to me, and he said, I'll get the issue addressed. And then the next day, I woke up and read in the paper that he had been murdered. So it was like a shocking event. So it's interesting how this event that obviously affected my life had this ripple effect on so many other people as well, right? Who were seemingly disconnected. I mean, I didn't know my wife or her family at that time at all. I didn't know them from Adam. So it's very interesting how different people get touched by an event.
Mm-hmm. Um, and but I saw it as, in an event that was taking place in the political machinations of the city, which uh,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is what we just talked about a little bit earlier, that this is what a city uh, is made of. Someone getting in the way of something, well, then that person is eliminated and you have the crime. But that underlying,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. No.
I was just saying that the underlying reason is because, well, you were getting in the way of making money.
Yeah, I think if someone were to make a documentary on the history of Karachi and its crime, right, which I think personally is a fantastic idea, this would be, one of the cases that you would probably pick up as being one of those core cases that you want to discuss in a documentary like that. So I totally agree with you, and it's because of that, because it's a sort of marker in the history of crime or terrorism of that city, right?
Mhm. And you were 19 at that time, Omar?
Yeah, I was 19. I was 19. I was back for my. I was still in college. I was back for my summer vacations. I just finished my, I think, second year in college at the time. So yeah, I was very much there when it happened.
And did that and this did this enormous catastrophe in your life shape you're thinking about joining the police force?
Yes and no. I don't think it shaped it in any obvious way. So I've met people who kind of, who I didn't know, who sort of in our first meeting said, "Oh yeah, we know why you joined the police. You wanted to take revenge and all." And it wasn't like that. But I keep saying at various sort of festivals and all where I'm asked this question, right? That it did shape my thinking to the extent that it I saw the police during the investigation work very closely,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw how, because the case had a political connotation, and because the party that was accused at the time, the NQM, were the party of government. And so initially, when the investigation started, they started impeding the investigation, and the cops couldn't do anything. And they'd go and, pick up someone for questioning, and in 5 minutes, they'd be told by their political bosses that you have to sort of release that person. And this went on for about a year. And then a year later, the government changed, and the same cops, now that they didn't have those shackles imposed on them by this sort of political interference, uh, were extremely successful in apprehending the culprits, and they kind of like did a fantastic job, and arrested the people and brought them to justice, and frankly, performed miracles. So for me, it showed me that in a place like Pakistan, where we cannot take concepts like justice and fair play, or rule of law as a given. Individuals matter more, right? So if the right person in the right job, especially in a job like the police,
Mm-hmm.
where the impact that you have on people is so much greater than a lot of other government jobs. In fact, I'd say probably than any other government job, because the police is a sort of government job where you see society and humanity at its lowest ebb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your ability to kind of immediately help people is the highest. As compared to, let's say, if you're a customs officer, or you're a diplomat, or or a civil servant, where that ability to impact people's lives is a little more removed. Whereas in policing, you can see that. You can see the fruits of your labors right in front of you. So I think that aspect of policing got me hooked.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as I saw it unfold during the investigation into my father's murder. And that aspect always stayed with me, and which is why I was drawn to joining the police as a career. The ability to help people who are at their lowest ebb, right?
Right. And therefore, perhaps that is why your second dedication in your book is for the men and women of the Karachi police who put their lives on the line every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. I started writing this book. I keep saying that I started writing this book as a cathartic exercise for myself, but also as an exercise in storytelling, um, because of the circumstances of my life,
Mm-hmm.
I had seen the impact of Karachi's violence. We're all of us who've been brought up in Karachi have been impacted by the years of violence that the city went through in one way or another. We may not all have been direct victims, but it's always, I think, you can meet someone from Karachi on the other side of the world 20 years after the event, and yet we will still kind of have as Karachiites have very distinct memories of the violence in the city, and things like, oh yeah, we were going to give our A-level exams on a day when the MQM had called a strike and burnt 20 buses, and we couldn't or we had to kind of go through a curfew line to get to an exam center, or whatever, right? these are stories that you'll invariably find Karachiites sharing, even though they may have left Karachi decades ago.
Mhm.
And so, having seen the side or the story of the police, especially after I became a police officer and started, hanging out with my colleagues and listening to their stories, these were amazing stories, which till that point had never been reflected in the literature about our city,
Yep.
right? So the up to that point, and I am by no means an expert on books on Karachi, but to my as a generally avid reader, in my mind, it was that people who wrote about Karachi wrote of a sense of longing, and often they were writing from the point of view of having left and looking back, while living abroad, and they wrote about a sense of longing, and they wrote about experiences and all those sorts of things. But and yes, many writers touched upon the violence that the city underwent, but no one explored those stories, right? No one explored that this whole sort of cycle of violence with its various characters, whether they were hoodlums or terrorists or police officers, were just tremendous. Each one of them had tremendous stories on their own, right? So, and so that was my one of my reasons for starting to write The Prisoner, because I thought that those were the stories that needed to be told. No one had done it. No one had done it up to that point in on whether in film form or in book form, or for that matter, even in documentary form. And it seemed to me that this was the greatest story never told. Not having this huge human drama that had unfolded over whatever 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, you could kind of write a war and peace style book on the history of Karachi's violence. Uh, so that's why I was inspired by that. I was inspired by the stories of these police officers and by the sacrifices that so many of them gave.
Mhm. Well, you've done a brilliant job of it, and my own novel Mass Transit was published around 1998, and
Right.
dealing with the issues of the underlying violence in Karachi from the political angle, and sort of trying to get at why it was the way it was. But certainly,
Right. Yeah.
she didn't have the lens that you had and have from your own personal experience, but also your professional experience, which in a way, as a writer, I envy you, because you are inside the very innards of the city, and see things firsthand, in your job. And that gives you an incredible vantage point. And not everyone who is in the innards of a city has the ability or the desire to narrate its
Mhm.
story, or even to try to understand it in a way that is humane and sensitive. And you've done that, um, and I admire that. And now I want to ask you about your third dedication, which is to your friend and mentor, Chaudhry Aslam. Who's Chaudhry?
Mhm. Hello.
Hello, are you there?
Hi. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. I'm here. I'm here. Yeah.
Chaudhry Aslam. That's your third dedication in your book. Who is Chaudhry Aslam? Your
Yeah.
mentor.
So Aslam was my relationship with Aslam began uh, the day on a December day in 1998, because Aslam was the police officer who arrested my father's killer.
Mm-hmm.
And Aslam before then had been known as, a very um, what they call in local language, dabang cop in Karachi, which means he was a real sort of macho type of figure. He was known colloquially, and depending on your point of view, that was a good thing or a bad thing. He was known as an encounter specialist, which meant that he had killed a number of criminals and terrorists in police encounters, uh, and uh, and he was this larger than life figure. And obviously, I, as a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, I of course know this history now very well as a senior police officer, and having been, having worked with Aslam and people like him for the last 25 years. But back then, I knew none of this, right? Chaudhry Aslam could have been Phil for all I knew. Or the only thing I knew about him was that he had been the guy to arrest my father's killer, and that he had done it. He had done the thing that we were so sort of desperate. He had gotten the result, I should say, that we were so desperate to get, where everyone else had failed. And
Mhm.
then subsequently, after that initial meeting, I joined the police a few years later. So I joined in 2001, so like 3 years later. And after my training in the police academy and the civil services academy and all, I kind of ended up being posted in Karachi in 2003. And by 2003, the wheel had turned, and Aslam and a number of the other officers who had been part of what was known as the Karachi operation of the 1990s. So they were the police officers who had been working against the MQM militants, and been heavily involved in the years of the 1990s. They'd been left out in the cold because it was Musharraf's era. Musharraf had kind of brought the MQM back into the fold, and he'd given them unparalleled power. They controlled the government of Sindh, and as a result, one of the top items on their agenda when they came to power was to target and get after these police officers who, in their opinion, had been sort of hunting their people, right? And so these officers like Aslam, like Irfan Bahadur, like Tawfiq Zahid, a number of these names who were sort of headliners from the 1990s, by 2003 were kind of they were either suspended, they didn't have jobs, they were sidelined, they were, if they had jobs, they were posted to some god-forsaken place in the interior of Sindh or in Balochistan somewhere. And everything was a struggle, and a number of them at that time were already being targeted and murdered by the MQM, who was sort of settling scores. And so, as a young officer, as an ASP, a bunch of these guys, because Aslam had known me and because we'd had this interaction at the time of when he caught my father's killer. um, so he and a number of those officers started hanging out with me, and I would do little jobs for them, like they needed security because the government had ordered their security to be withdrawn, and so I would sort of, from the police stations under my control, give them a couple of gunmen or security officers and things like that. And so, and it was at that time, because obviously these guys didn't have anything to do, right? So it was at that time that a lot of the stories that I then kind of put into my books were revealed to me, because we would have these long chats over endless cups of tea at the thana or the police station, and where these guys would would swap war stories, and it just totally fascinated me. I mean, they totally grabbed my attention, and I kind of wanted to be that sort of police officer who had done all these things, and who had sort of fought the good fight, or whatever, however you want to term it. Um, and then maybe a year or so later, I got the opportunity to do it because Aslam, in fact, came to me and he said, the government, which is still the MQM government, is giving us an opportunity to kind of to bring us back, and if we carry out this operation against these criminals in Liari.
So,
And should we do it?
Umar, let's
Yeah,
uh, let's pause right here and come right back
absolutely.
and begin talking from the operation in Liari. Huh? This is fascinating.
Okay, awesome. All right. So you're going to send me a new link, or should I log into the same link?
We'll log into the same link. Okay, so I'll be right.
Okay, awesome.
So yes, Umar. So continue the operation in Liari.
So yeah, so Aslam came to me and he said, "Look, there's this opportunity. Um, the current government who've been against us and essentially been hunting us for, at that time it had been something like 5 years, are now saying that you can kind of come back, and as long as you sort out this problem in Liari, because Liari was the oldest part of Karachi. It was this area of the city which had become a refuge of gangsters, and there were gang wars and drug wars and all these sorts of things going on, and they were escalating pretty rapidly at the time. And he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, look, you guys have been out, you've been frozen out for 5 years, and I think you need to sort of get back in the game. And if Providence has decreed that your former or your the people who are against you are kind of giving you this opportunity, then you should grab it. And he said, okay, but I'll do it on one, with one caveat, and that is that you work with us, because we don't trust any other police officer, because all the other police officers have kind of betrayed us, or they weren't there for us when we needed them. And so I said, yeah, sure. And that's how Aslam and I, started working together. We went to Liari together with this whole team of Aslams, and subsequently, not only Liari, but we went on to work in the counterterrorism department for a number of years. And so Aslam became a friend, and as I said, a mentor, because I learned a lot as a police officer from him. If I mean, he is one of, without a doubt, one of the biggest influences, professional influences on me today. And and of course, then going forward, fast forward to 2010, and we were working together in the counterterrorism department,
Mhm.
which at the time used to be known as the CID instead of the CTD.
Mhm.
And our offices were bombed in a suicide attack. And the information we received was that it was because of operations and arrests that Aslam and I had conducted against the Pakistani Taliban. And the Taliban had carried out this attack to eliminate us. And in fact, both of us were on a hit list.
Mm.
And at the time, friends and colleagues within the security services told me that, look, I think you guys have done a lot of work, and I think because your name has become so prominent in these hit lists, it's maybe a good idea for you to disappear off the scene for a while.
Mm.
And so this, as it happened a few months later, this opportunity came along to move to London
Mm.
and work there temporarily, and I took it. And Aslam stayed on. I said, I told him that, I think maybe you should, move off the scene as well for a while. And he said, no, no, nothing will happen. And I remember that I moved to London in June of 2011. And I think it was September of 2011 or October perhaps, when there was a massive attack on his house, and his house was blown apart, and it was just sheer by a suicide bomber. And it was sheer luck that his family, who were in the house at the time, were unhurt. Because if you had seen the house, I wasn't there. I remember seeing footage of it on the TV and on and online. but you would not imagine that a family could have survived such a bomb blast. And again, at that point, I kind of, other friends and I counseled him that, look, pull out, you're too far gone. But I think that event of the attack on his house, uh, in many ways radicalized him, because the Taliban or these jihadi forces had made it personal. Then he also made it personal. And I think at that point he went into this spiral of fighting it out with them, where which ultimately resulted in his death when he was sort of martyred 3 years after that in January 2014. And again, it's this strange link that we have in life, where the day that Aslam was murdered was January the 9th, 2014. And I was due to do the first, so the prisoner had come out in December of 2013. So, like, it had just been out for perhaps 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right? And I was scheduled to do the first ever book event for the prisoner on that day. And I was literally kind of getting into my car. I had come back. I was there from London, and I was there, doing a couple of these events. And I was literally getting into my car, Maniza, when I got this call that there's been an attack on Aslam. And I don't even remember who called me, but they said, we think he's dead. And I, instead of going to that book event, rushed to the scene of the crime. So this, as I said, there's this thread. It's uncanny, but there's this thread that runs through our lives that kind of links us together. And I just when I think that uh, I the so in the first edition of The Prisoner, perhaps Aslam, the dedication did not include Aslam, but in the second edition of The Prisoner, it did. So, and that kind of just also it works in terms of the timelines, because obviously the first edition came out just like 2 weeks before his death, and that was no one had, of course, none of us could imagine that anything like this would have happened. And obviously the second edition came out a few months after his death. And so I think the dedication that you're reading right now was put in there in the second edition, and subsequent in every subsequent edition.
Naturally, because the first edition was the event that you were going to.
Exactly, yeah.
And this thread that you speak about that runs through your lives, Chaudhry Aslam's and yours, is it that thread that connects Chaudhry Aslam to your father?
Yeah, I think, I will always um, view him as being someone who did a huge, I owe him a huge debt, because he was the cop who kind of gave justice to this, like, 19-year-old kid and his mother, who didn't, who at that time was sort of at a very low ebb, because no one else would do that, right? Because of the political sensitivities and all of these sorts of things that were connected to the case. And Aslam was the guy who did it. So I think that aspect of it will always be there. And the fact that I think that we were working together, and as fate decreed, I decided to heed these warnings that were provided, and those warnings were about both of us, right? So I decided to heed those warnings and kind of go off the scene for a while, and he did not. And in many ways, I guess it's a strange sort of survivor's guilt.
Would you say that any of your characters are based on him, or is that waiting to happen? Will you be writing about
Yeah,
him?
I think no. Akbar Khan was based on him. But again, the point we were talking about earlier about characters reflecting different points and different things when you look at them in different ages and in different books. So Akbar Khan was based on Aslam, was styled on Aslam, and it was obviously easier to do that because as a very young and inexperienced writer, it was a lot easier to kind of take a live character and create a sort of skit or a sketch of that human being rather than coming up with a character all on your own, right?
Mhm.
And so Akbar represents the Aslam of the 1990s and perhaps the Aslam whom I initially met in 1998 and who initially sort of partnered with me in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
The Akbar Khan does not represent the Aslam who came later.
Yeah,
After he
yeah.
had spent well, it does I think reflect the Aslam who had spent a couple of years in jail for a crime he didn't commit. So that aspect is absolutely there in Akbar Khan. But the later thing, after the attempt on his family's life and the period where he got into this death spiral with the jihadis,
Mhm.
that obviously was a very different Akbar Khan. And that so perhaps it's food for thought that if the character is to come back, perhaps it should or he should reflect that later stage in Aslam's life. Absolutely, that's a very very I think that would be a very interesting story to tell.
Yeah, and I think you would do it great justice because you're so emotionally vested in it, I feel. I mean, I'm completely immersed with you in the story right now that you're telling, and I think you would do it great justice. You would do him justice, and that might be something for you to think about. Um, Tell me more about the operation in Liari in terms of not the operation itself, but what did you learn about Liari and what was that like? And did you feel that what you were encountering was crime, or was it just the social choices available to the people there?
So Liari, I think I always say is unlike any other part of Karachi because Liari has a culture all its own. It's the oldest part of the city.
Mhm.
It has a diversity or it had a diversity of cultures even when Karachi did not, right? So Liari was always multicultural well before Karachi became this sort of poster of multiculturalism or and ethnicity. Um, Liari always had those things. Uh, Liari has a very vibrant political culture. It has a very vibrant. Its people are very progressive. They remain progressive despite the years of Islamization and Ziaul-Haq's martial law. Even at that time, Liari remained a bastion of the struggle against those forces because it was a bastion for the Pakistan People's Party. So it has all these sort of stories wrapped in it, and at the same time, crime is very much a part of Liari's story because it's a slum area. There's always been crime there, and there've always been these figures almost generationally,
Mhm.
uh, probably going back before pre-partition,
Mhm.
where they've been what you would recognize as gangsters. If the story of Liari was transported and compared to the Lower East Side of New York or Harlem or anything like that, right? So Liari definitely has that culture that where you see that progression and those gangsters over time progressed and expanded their criminal activities from those that were relatively simple in the early days to more and more complex and more violent activities, with guns and sort of automatic weapons and grenade launchers and all these sorts of things. Uh, and that crime, and I think the people of Liari, uh, because people in Karachi and certainly in Karachi and in a lot of other places as well, tend to view Liari through that prism of crime. So, it's sort of like, oh yeah, it's so and so's from Liari and everything in Liari is messed up. No, I think the people of Liari resent that because it's putting them in a box, right? It's like saying, oh, you're all a bunch of criminals or all a bunch of terrorists or whatever. And so you have these sort of Robin Hood stories in Liari as well. So you have characters like Uzair Baloch, who was one of the gangsters of Liari, emerging and becoming a sort of social worker type of person. And you have these sort of myths of Uzair Baloch putting up these huge flat screen televisions to broadcast the football World Cup, because Liari is the one part of Pakistan that is not cricket crazy and in fact is football crazy, right? So I think it was the 2010 World Cup, the one that was in South Africa, or the
Yep.
2014 one of the two, where Uzair put up these massive screens, and it was this whole story of, he said, "Oh, I'm doing it so that the people can watch football, and this is something that's not just for the elites to watch; it's also for the common people." And that got him a lot of cheers and all those sorts of things. And at the same time, Uzair was a bloodthirsty criminal. Who was wanted in a number of murder cases and extortion cases, and he was running a criminal empire, right? And yet he has this Robin Hood image and Robin Hood effect. And I deal with Liari a lot in my book, The Party Worker, because the party worker sort of looks at these sorts of Robin Hood figures, and Liari's history is replete with them. So
Mhm.
every gangster, almost virtually every gangster in Liari, once he's made some money and made his place in the world, decides that he wants to be respectable and he wants to be a social worker and a pillar of the community and all that. And so they all kind of move towards this sort of what I would call gentrification. And that's very particular to Liari, that it's almost every 20 odd years that happens almost without fail.
Hmm. Well, sounds like where we started this podcast talking about what is the foundation of a city, that it crime, and do those criminals then become pillars of society? Why should a part of Karachi, which is so vibrant and important, Liari, be any different from the other pillars of society there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Omar, I wanted to also talk to you about the history of the institution of police in Pakistan or in the subcontinent or anywhere where there was the empire, and the
Hmm.
roots of the police forces. Um, can you talk about that? About how uh, the police was actually created here um, as, would you say, a paramilitary force to further the objectives of empire or the East India Company and the Raj? And can you speak to that and how that may
Yeah.
respond?
Yeah. Like we keep talking about origin stories, right? And it's the same with the police's origin story in the Indian subcontinent, where it was brought in as an institution for a very different purpose to the purpose that it was brought in, let's say, in the UK, right? In the UK, it kind of grew up, and the whole. If you go to speak to anyone in the Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard, they will tell you that, oh, we have, from the time that the police was brought in, a very conscious effort was made that they weren't going to be armed, and they were going to be a civil force, and they were always going to. It was so that they should be a midway point where if you had to interact with uh, the citizens, and if there was sort of public order and the increasing problems of crime and all in a rapidly industrializing society, it should be done without resort to the army or to a paramilitary force, right? And so the whole culture of the London Bobby emerged from that, of being this friendly character who kind of helps people. And if you're in London and you're lost, you go up to a policeman, and he or she will give you directions of how to get to wherever you want to get to, and all these sorts of things. And the inception of the police in the subcontinent was very different, because the model that was taken on in the subcontinent came from actually not the Metropolitan Police in London, but actually the Royal Irish Constabulary. And the Irish Constabulary was again a force that had been created in a colonial possession to police the natives.
Mhm.
And the point of both the Irish Constabulary and the police in India, or in United India, was that they were to be the coercive arm of the state, and they were to live off the land, right? So a lot of the issues that we see to this day, both in India and Pakistan, I'll add, have to do with that. So, for instance, we've always debated this issue of police resources, and why the police never has enough resources, and at the police station level, there isn't a budget for things like paper clips and paper, and to file cases, or for case diaries, and all these very minor things, right? And the historical sort of background to that is that because in a largely what was at that time in the 19th century, a largely rural society, it was the police station was supposed to be the symbol of the state, and the English, or rather the symbol not of the state, but the symbol of the colonial master, right? So that police station was supposed to, by design, live off the land. So, if it was a police station, the SHO, the head of the police station, and his force would go to the local landowners and tell them, right, you better give me 3 cows or 10 sheep or whatever, because I need food, and you better give X number of bags of wheat from your produce or from your agricultural yield to feed the police station. And so that culture, that predatory culture, I would say, uh, is, or we see it manifest itself in what we call police corruption to this day, right? That because the police was there to sort of represent the colonial enterprise, and to keep these natives in check through a combination of carrot and stick, and fundamentally to ensure, not to ensure justice, but to ensure social order. And you sort of see the remnants of that to this day. That I would venture, even in India, right? So Pakistan, you can say, has a checkered history of democracy, with on again, off again sort of periods of, between martial law and democracy. But even in India, where you've had uninterrupted democratic governments since partition,
Yeah.
you find that the way that the police is used by their political masters is very much in the same thing, right? It's to sort of send a message to your opponents, or to coerce those who are not being coerced otherwise.
Mhm. So not to ensure justice, but to maintain or maintain a social order, but also to
Yeah.
the property of the empire.
Yeah, and again, that was the key element within social order, right? That if to protect the possessions of the colonial enterprise. So not necessarily always to protect the possessions of the citizens,
Mhm.
but that may be a third or fourth priority at best, but to protect the possessions of the state, of the of the colonial enterprise, as you put it. And that of course included land, and that included enforcement of land revenue, more importantly. So if landowners were not paying their rent, so the revenue owed to the state, that is why the revenue collector, the district collector, was given the police, and the police was placed under his control, so that he could immediately order the police to go and arrest defaulters who were not paying their fair share in terms of land revenue. And that was again because the colonial enterprise was there for the exploitation of those resources. And the police was a tool through which made that exploitation more efficient.
Efficient. And it was the same model, it's a through line that was used in the early days of the United States, in the colonies, and the structure of the police was created so that you protected plantation owners and their property, and made sure that their property, i.e. slaves, didn't run away and were kept in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting parallel. Comparing it to the deep south, especially. And yes, absolutely, there's a lot of that. In the deep south, obviously the principal property was the slaves, and the fact that you didn't want them running around or running off, and in the subcontinent it was land, and the revenue earned from the land, and you didn't want anything disrupting that process. So, if these fussy natives got up and started protesting, that would mean that so many people weren't working the land, and that would mean that, there were going to be the efficiency of the revenue collection system would be impacted, and so you didn't want that happening, and so you wanted the police to shut down protests and all, even when they were peaceful. You wanted them shut down as quickly as possible. And so, resultantly, the laws were also designed in the same way, right? To create this state infrastructure that rested on not on justice, but on social order.
Mm-hmm. And if you read the book, I'm sure you have, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which discusses the Caste, the origins of our discontents is the name of the book, and she traces
Right.
the racism and bigotry in the United States against African Americans to slavery, and then all the structures, all the institutions that were created to keep it in place, and to policing being one of those institutions. We can almost see,
Right.
as we just discussed, the similarities with Pakistan and India and probably East Africa and elsewhere where empire ruled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. It's fascinating, actually. When you start drawing these sorts of parallels, absolutely fascinating.
Fascinating. And I hope that you'll be able to, someday bring all of this to bear in your novels. That's just fascinating. Have you thought about this in bringing in these aspects?
Well, Maniza, so I have never written any of my books with a very pointed social messaging.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, because I tell the story of those institutions, right, that are there, so you can see a lot of that, right? So if you read, let's say, the party worker or the prisoner, you understand, or you should get a flavor of the police and its practices, and that culture, right? So it does bring to light that culture that exists.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. There's no need to, shove it down anyone's throat and say it in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, for anyone who can see and isn't blind to the patterns across the globe, they'll see it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And now The Prisoner has been translated to Urdu.
Yeah.
And how does it uh, does it do justice to The Prisoner in English, or is it even better in Urdu?
Well, I will make a confession. I have not read the entire manuscript, and that's just because my reading in Urdu is so slow that it would probably take me something like 6 to 8 months to read the entire thing. But I've read, the one thing I did was that when we were going through the process of translation with Inam Nadeem, who's the translator who's done this tremendous work. I would kind of take random passages and read them, and just to get a sense of stylistically how the book was going. And one of the things that I told Inam Saab, Professor Inam, in fact, I should say, was that when he started, he was to start off with, he was not very eager to translate it, because he said, and as he repeatedly says, he says that, look, I was a guy who did literary translations, right? And this, in my view, was not a literary book at all. It was, you can term it as commercial fiction, you can term it as pulp fiction, but it was not my cup of tea. And the our publisher told him that, look, here's the English copy. Just take a read, right? I mean, no one's putting a gun to your head and telling you to translate. Just take a read and see how you feel about the book. And he says that I started reading the book, and again, Inam was someone who had lived through this entire period of the 1980s and 90s as a young man, as a college student, and all those sorts of things. So he had seen the violence that we all saw in Karachi. And he says that, as I started reading the book, I said, this is my story. This is the story of my life. This is what I've seen. This is the stuff we saw. And this is the story of every Karachiite. And so he took on the task of translating it. And when we had one of our first meetings, he of course did not tell me at them. He only told me after the book was published that, oh, I was very reluctant to do it initially. But when we had one of our first meetings, I told him that, look, Inam Saab, the thing is that I know you're a literary sort of translator and a literary author. But this book is not literary. So if you try and translate this like a very literary Urdu novel, with a lot of emphasis on diction and turn of phrase and all that sort of stuff, it won't work. There's got to be a bit of street in it, right? So, and the example that I gave him, I said, look, the novel has a lot of swear words, and you can't kind of like tone them down in the Urdu version. You have to put them up the same way. That these are, because that is the story, and that's the way that these people talk. If you are a militant or a police officer in Liaqtabad police station in Karachi or wherever, uh, you're not going to talk. You're not going to do a lot of aap janab, sort of very formalistic conversation in Urdu, right? You're going to have a whole bunch of bhen chods and that sort of thing, those sorts of abuses in your daily sort of diatribe. So and he did that, and I think my greatest compliment to him is that he got that point and he did it, and the Urdu version that you see now is full of well, it's of course full of all the swear words, but it but those swear words bring to life the culture of the book, and they bring to life those characters.
Mhm. I sitting in the bazaar at Pioneer Book House, and working there every day, one day I said to Zafar साहब मुझे बताया गया था कि बाजार में तो मर्द बहुत गालियों से गलोच से बात करते हैं, लेकिन मैंने तो अभी एक भी गाली नहीं सुनी इर्द गिर्द भी. तो ही
Right.
सेड इसलिए कि सबको पता है इर्द गिर्द कि आप अंदर बैठी हुई हैं. So yeah, I think that's the punctuation and grammar of Karachi language, and very real. And if you're squeamish about it, well, then
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be colonial. Sorry, I'm colonial. I meant colloquial. It's got to be street, right? It's got to, as I say, it's got to when you kind of reading and flipping the pages, you've got to smell the ozone in Karachi, right?
Mhm.
That's the proof of a book's success, that you should feel that it transports you back into those dirty, grimy streets.
Love the way you just in one line described Sadr by saying tire parts sitting next to Jane Austen's doggy. I thought he's got it in one. He lovely, just beautiful, Umar. That's,
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite passages.
yes, that's pretty literary in my book. I was going to ask, what is a literary novel?
I haven't figured it out. I'm told that these sorts of distinctions are made because so that booksellers know where to place books in terms of shelf space. You, having been a bookseller, can verify whether this is correct or not. But I've never got that. And I've also never gotten uh, this sort of feeling. And I was amazed that it's there, not only there, it's a global thing, that there's this sort of snootiness and this looking down upon uh, within the literary community of what they term commercial fiction and what they term literary fiction. And I couldn't tell you honestly what the difference is and how you define that. And funnily enough, when the Urdu translation of The Prisoner came out, I found that the same sort of bias exists between Urdu literary circles, where they again sort of don't even want to be seen in the same room as kind of like commercial writers, God forbid. And so I find it hilarious that you'll probably find the same thing on the Upper East Side as you will in Urdu Bazaar.
Well, on that note, can we take a pause here and come back?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, great. So, Umar, we were talking about how the Urdu literary circles are taking the translation of your novel, The Prisoner, into Urdu. So they're getting a little bit hot under the collar and consider this a commercial enterprise and not a literary piece of work.
Well, I think that is true of more. I mean, The Prisoner, or Kaidi as it's now known in Urdu, is still early days because it's come out, it's just been about maybe 3-4 months since it's been out. So it's early days, but generally, when I kind of got into this world, I was amazed because I remember that when The Prisoner came out, it faced a lot of, I wouldn't say resistance, but there was a degree of snootiness, for lack of a better word, where people were like, "Oh, is this?" But this is like, "Oh, this is so commercial. This is so, this is not literary. This isn't." And I just found it hilarious that sort of fast forward 10 years or 12 years, and you find the exact same thing happening in the world of Urdu fiction as well.
It's hilarious to me what you're saying, because I mean, if anything, I'm baffled by this reaction, but also, we need to be negative with anything new and fresh and captivating and real. I thought the very opposite, and as I was saying earlier, I don't understand these differences and categories that we need to create for literary versus pulp fiction. I don't put this in the category of pulp fiction at all.
Yeah.
And I think you cautioned me a little bit earlier, that you don't do social messaging in your novels, but I find this such a window into the machinations and the mechanics and the workings of the inside of a city, the innards, the intestines of a city, you know.
But it's interesting, so you've been both a bookseller and a writer. Where do you kind of, how do you define what is literary fiction and what is commercial fiction and what the difference between the two is, other than like literally sales, right? So is commercial fiction just anything that's actually been successful, that or what is it? How would you look at it from both of your perspectives?
Well, I think that for me, if you look at all the fiction that we now consider literature, right? English fiction, or maybe that's the case in every language. Well, it was first written for newspapers as a daily story that helped sell
Right.
newspapers. So it was very
Yeah.
commercial in its in the way it was sold. So and it was very literary because it captured people's imaginations, and it would the narratives were always a metaphor for people's inner lives. um, and so for me, literature is whatever speaks to you and stays with you and speaks to, you might be writing a story of crime, but it is if it speaks to everyone, it speaks to something that is internal to them, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
and and that is literature. Anything that takes you into another realm, that makes you see things differently, that makes you see, that takes away your blinders, that
Right. Right.
that provides that kind of a window that makes you travel into other people's spaces is
Right.
literature. What else is literature?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I envy you for that. As you said, I'm a writer, and my first novel was Mass Transit, where I thought I was doing something similar. I was writing the larger story of Karachi, but
Right.
I I don't have I did not have the world that you have, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the world you have, Omar. It is your ability as well. You're an author. You're a talented writer. So you're doubly blessed. You have the vantage point, and you can tell that story. So if anything, if there's anybody getting hot under the collar about your Urdu translation, now your book coming in as an Urdu translation, and thinking and passing judgment on it as it not being literature, well, it's because they're threatened. I have to say it quite simply. It's just that they're threatened by it, because gone are the days of just getting away with saying nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a fair point, and I think I do consider myself blessed to be in a very unique space because, like we were talking about earlier, when I was introduced to the stories of these police officers, right, sitting at the police station over a late night cup of tea or whatever. Uh, there was this world, right? That I was introduced to, and it's in many ways a closed world, right? Because police officers everywhere in the world, not just in Pakistan, are kind of very clannish and don't really open up to the rest of the world because they feel that the world doesn't understand them, and there's very few of them who could perhaps articulate those stories or those emotions uh, in a wider audience. So having that sweet spot of being in the middle of that, I think is a really really great place to be. Mohammed Hanif always jokes with me that there should be a ban or a limit on the number of books that you can write because you have an unfair advantage. And I at one point I remember I was joking. He said, "I think I'm going to go to court and file a petition that you have an unfair advantage and you are operating a monopoly because you have access to these sorts of stories."
Add my
Uh,
name. Add my name to the petition. It's true. And
so
I really think you have such an amazing vantage point, and you have so many more novels in you. And I want you to bring Akbar Khan back and Constantine to Consadine.
well, I think, like I said, I was on the fence about Akbar, but maybe our conversation today may have sealed the deal in his favor.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful, Omar. I'll take that as a compliment.
No, it's just, I mean, while we've been speaking, I've been thinking about this, and yeah, I think it would be tremendous to kind of revisit him as a character in a different, at a slightly different point in his life, as I did with Constantine. And in fact, when I wrote Betrayal, the other thing was that Betrayal also was written with the mindset that Betrayal could be part of a kind of 2 book or 3 book trilogy or duology, right?
Mhm.
Telling this sort of story with Constantine as the central character in it. So there's that angle as well that's there. And yeah, I think it would be very interesting. I think it would be tough. It wouldn't be as simple. I wouldn't say easy because I don't think it was ever easy, but I don't think it would be as it would be much more challenging, shall we say, doing it. But I think it would be potentially very rewarding.
It will be very rewarding, and it'll be very rewarding for your readers. And Omar, I wish you the best of luck in your next piece of writing. I'm eager to read your next novel. And thank you so very much for having.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun. It's actually been a really kind of, like I said, if you may have clarified my thought process and given me ideas for a bunch of other kind of, well, for characters and all. And so it's been professionally, it's been great being chatting with you today.
Thank you very much, Omar Shahid Hamid, novelist and police officer par excellence. Thank you.
Bye.
That is.